Hello, everyone, and welcome to Make It Monday, where we're going to be doing a little surgery today. I'm Jim with Amy Sews, and I thought for today's topic, I'd talk about how to get a good seam allowance on your serger. I just returned from the tour for Original Sewing Quilt Expo, and one of the biggest questions I got a lot was about how to maintain the seam allowance on your serger, because it's so simple to do it on your sewing machine. We've been doing it for years. You know where to look on your throw plate or your foot, or maybe have a specialty foot for it. But a lot of us maybe just got a serger and we're not quite sure as to where to look to get an accurate seam allowance, because it could be confusing if you're doing 5/8, half inch, quarter, whatever. So I thought I'd take us over to the serger and kind of answer a couple questions for that. So here we go. So I'm at the serger now. I'm in front of a Bernina LA60. And one of the first things I want to do is determine what's the width of my seam allowance. And let's say, for example, I was doing some knits and I wanted to do a 1/4 inch seam allowance because that's what the pattern called for. One of the things I find is really important to have is a measuring guide like this, because it has all the different little increments on there. And if I look around here, I got, oh, there's 1/4 inch right here. So where do I look? Well, what I want to do is I want to have the furthest needle out, whether I'm doing a 3-thread or 4-thread serging. I want to have it with the farthest needle out to the left. That's the one I'm going to measure from. And I would put my guide toward that, and that'll give me my seam allowance for where I need to position the right edge of my fabric. So when I look down at here, I'm going to open up my serger just to make it a little easier to look at. And right now my cutting width is set at the standard width. And if I put that 1/4 inch down there and I kind of look in here, you could see where my stitch finger, which is actually right here, I can see that that's going to be where the end of the seam will be, which means it's a little more than a 1/4. So one of the first things I would do is I would move the blade over, and you can see my blade moved from the standard width to a narrow one. And right along this edge is where it's going to cut. And if I look at that, that's where I'm going to get my 1/4 inch then. So for this particular application, right now I could line it up there. So when I go to put my fabric in, and let's say I was using this one, I would actually then put my fabric under the presser foot and have it line up so it's just beside the left side of the blade there. This way I know it'll cut it just a little bit. And there is even a little mark on my presser foot. So I would kind of guide my fabric right there. So actually that's exactly where I'm going to look, is right here on that first mark. And that's going to give me a good 1/4 inch seam allowance. But what if I'm making a garment? Let's say I'm doing a dress shirt and it has a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. I'm not doing a French seam. I want to go and cut all that off. Well, it'll just be the same thing. I'm going to go ahead and line up my guide with the very left side of my needle. And I can see now that my fabric's going to come out a lot further. So as I lay this down, I can see that it's just about, wow, at the edge of my throat plate. So what I would need to do then is, as I go to serge, I would keep my fabric just about there. And what it'll do is it'll trim off the excess fabric. And in this case, I probably want a little wider seam allowance within the overcasting. So again, when I go to sew, I would cut off that extra fabric I don't need, and then I would still get the accurate sizing of my garment, which is rather important. So for example, if I would go to serge this up, I have my 2 layers, and I'm going to guide it right about here on the edge of that. So again, as I look at my seam allowance with my measurement tool, it's right up just a scant in, maybe even like barely an eighth of an inch in. So I'm kind of using that as a guide, and that's where I'm going to look. Or if you have a attachment like this is a seam guide that comes with the L860. I can use that, and that way I know I'm looking right here, always guiding my fabric in. It'll trim off that little bit of excess for me. And then I got a really nice seam. And then I would get a true 5/8 inch seam allowance from the pattern, meaning, again, if I had a dress shirt or garment and it calls for a 5/8 inch seam allowance, I would go ahead and search right on there. This will trim off the excess, and my garment won't be too big or too small. If I was doing like that 1/4 inch, like I mentioned earlier, again, I would just line it up with the side of my blade. If I need to move my guide in, if I don't have a guide like that, I'm again looking right here where the blade is, and also where the little notches on my foot to give me a true and accurate seam allowance. And that way I have a very good edge on that, and it just barely trimmed off any of the little whiskers or little extra threads that are hanging around that would kind of not make my seam look as neat as it could, because you can see here it gives me a nice, really clean, professional looking seam. All the loopers are catching right in the very edge of the fabric, which is exactly what I want. And it's going to give me like a much better result when I work with it. So again, I would definitely pick up like a little measuring gauge and using whatever needle position you're using. Again, if I'm doing a 4 thread like this one, I'm going to put the guide right along the edge of my needle, and you could see this is going out a little bit further from my right needle. So it's going to give me a true 1/4 inch. So again, I'll line up my fabric with that marking, which would be just where I have it here. If I was doing 5/8, I would, of course, go to my 5/8 inch guide. And I know that my raw edge of my fabric would be much closer to the edge of my throat plate. And that way it'll help me to maintain that accurate seam allowance. So what's more important is my garment doesn't, or project I'm working on doesn't get reduced in size because I cut off too much, or I don't know. So again, it's a little bit of practice. And hi, Jeanette and Vicki. It's always good to see you guys here, and also when I'm on the road. But again, make sure you pick up a little seam guide like that. It'll just make your serging a lot more accurate and easier to do. I also use this too on the sewing machine. It's really nice to kind of, as a refresher, when you want to get like a scant 1/4 inch seam allowance, always using that, and then going in a couple bits on the needle position just to get you a really nice, true, accurate seam allowance. So hopefully that'll help you with that. If you're interested, we also have a Serger subscription box here at Amy Sews. Just go to amysews.com. You can get all the information about that if you'd like to join us every other month for our different Serger projects there. And if you kind of like this tip also, you can find me on the road. Just go to the sewingexpo.com, as I'm one of the instructors with the original Sewing and Quilt Expo. And our schedule is coming up for the next year. So I'll be sure to check in on that to see where we're all going to be and what we're going to do. So that being said, hope everybody has a great day. And as Amy would say, remember, the more you know, the more you sew. Take care.